Hey, Messengers listeners. Today we are talking about data-driven design. That is not designing based on just what you think looks good, but on what actually functions and performs best for you and your business as well. So stay tuned. All right, welcome to the Messengers podcast. I am Chris Searles. With me today is Rob Seifert, the creative director here at Searles Graphics. Today we're talking about data-driven design, which really is about getting you out of the thought process of design being all about what looks nice and more into kind of comboing an aesthetic with a functional purpose, and then actually collecting data and using the data that you collect to make changes to that design to optimize for performance. We talk about it hopefully in almost every episode because it's that important. We definitely talked about it a good amount in last week's episode about Facebook advertising. We've talked about it in a number of other episodes. If you want, check out the video for this podcast on YouTube. We'll try to link to all those. And if you go to our website, messengers.blog, we'll try to link to a bunch of those as well. So if you're if you're more interested in seeing, reading, watching, listening to some of those episodes where we go into how to collect that data maybe in a little more detail, definitely check that out. But today we really want to talk about how it actually drives your design. What kind of design decisions you're making, and making sure that you're making those decisions based on data and not just somebody's subjective opinion on what they think looks a little better than what somebody else thinks. Really, these days, it's never been easier to collect data. I mean, that's why big data is a thing. That's why it's an entire industry in and of itself, because we have the ability to collect enormous amounts of data. But one of the problems that we see a lot is people that, even if they're collecting data, they're not actually using it. We have a blog post. I wrote an article for our blog a long time ago, advising a lot of people not even to put Google Analytics on their website because they'd put it in there and then would never even look at it. They have no idea what's going on their website, even with the ability to find out exactly what pages people are looking at, what content they're looking at, what's causing them to leave your website. I mean, all those things, all that stuff is available. And the lack of utilization of those tools, even when they're there and collecting data, to me is kind of astonishing. And again, I mean, we've never in the history of marketing has there been the ability to collect that kind of data, or at the scale that we can do it now. Right. The key is actually using it and changing what you're doing based on the realities of the way people are interacting with your design.
Yeah, I think it's also still relatively so new, in terms of all this data that we have access to, that it's a little overwhelming for a lot of people, to try to do it all on their own and evaluate everything. I definitely understand a little bit more why, not understanding data evaluation as well as you do, but, I can definitely see the benefit of it. I understand that, that you can determine people's, buying behaviors and fine-tune markets by evaluating that data.
Well, I think that's a good point. That information overload is a real thing. And for a lot of people, most people, I would say, if you don't kind of really enjoy getting into the weeds and digging through that and trying to find stuff that works, a lot of times I know most of our clients, they'll log into Google Analytics once and they just see the sheer volume of stuff that's available, and just kind of say, I don't have the time to even attempt to figure out what I'm looking at here. And going back to, it's not a new thing, right? We've had the ability to do some element of that for a long time. I mean, there's always been, since 800 numbers were created, you've had the ability to put two different phone numbers on two different ads and test those ads against each other and see which one generates more results.
Right.
So there's been an ability to do that. It's just been much simpler as far as what your options were. And you didn't have to worry about optimizing 10 different landing pages and testing those against each other and trying to figure out, on each individual page, which elements of that page are actually working, which ones aren't, what are people looking at, what aren't they. As far as the creative that got them to that page in the first place, what was working, which ones of those were working, which ones weren't. Even if you're kind of tying that into your print advertising, it's the same thing, right? I mean, I did a direct mail piece and, we tested two different versions of that, but, what part of which of those pieces actually drove people to our website or to pick up the phone. And then once they were there, how can I track down what I was doing at that point in the conversation to keep them there, and what parts of the design worked and what parts didn't. So I think that the sheer volume of it all gets overwhelming for a lot of people, especially small businesses where you don't have a team of people dedicated to that stuff, or you're not isolated to the point where it's, okay, well, this is this product team that's focused on optimizing for this product, where
Right.
if you're a small business and you sell a bunch of different things and you have a lot of different products or different services, and you're one person trying to optimize all those things, it becomes very overwhelming very fast. And I think the key to that is start somewhere. Focus on one thing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, right? Compartmentalize it and just take it one chunk at a time. I mean, I guess, just hearing what you're saying, I guess the start that I would have is, determining the variables you want to test within it, whether you're, design being one thing, the message being another, and, keep your market consistent, and then just see which one of those is working better if we're talking about, data-driven design here. I mean, that would be my start point for something like that.
Yeah, I think there's two primary items that you can look at. One would be creative, right? What whether it's advertising, if it's videos that you're putting out, or viral content, or print advertising, direct mail, whatever that is, that the creative element of that is something that you should absolutely be testing. If you're spending the kind of money to develop that content, we've talked about that. We had an episode about content marketing where we talked about the investment that really goes into doing that right. So if you're making that investment, there's no reason you can't spend a little bit of extra time to make sure that you're maximizing the value of that investment. So the content, I think, is or the creative and the way that you're kind of presenting that creative is certainly one of the first places that I would start to look at and optimize. I guess if we're really talking about data-driven design here, right? So we'll assume that one of the primary places you're trying to drive that audience then would be to a website, some sort of a landing page. That's another great starting point. Optimizing your landing page, trying different calls to action, different text in a button, different imagery. There is a lot of information out there about how people have gotten amazingly different results from just using two different pictures on a landing page. And, how well one worked versus how poorly another one worked. Everything else being the same, that those two things can actually have a huge effect. Right. Do you try maybe a video at the top of that page versus some text and a form and an image? All of those things are things that you can and should be testing, and that would kind of be the place where I would start if you're a little overwhelmed by it all. They're fairly easy to test. You're looking at an individual ad and A/B testing an ad. Again, we talked last week in our Facebook 101 episode about, a lot about A/B testing ads on Facebook in particular, but we've also talked about A/B testing direct mail pieces against each other, and even magazine ads and things like that. I mean, there's certainly a lot of ability to do that, and they're easy metrics, right? At that point, really, you're wondering, does somebody do what you want them to do, which is generally, did they click through to my website, or pick up the phone and call me. That's stuff that gets tracked basically by default by whatever platform you're using. Otherwise, if it's something that's a little more traditional, make sure you build the ability to measure that metric into your creative,
Right.
Which we, again, have another whole episode that was dedicated to that topic and how to do that.
Right.
From there, once they're on your website, the ability to determine, hey, well, we sent X number of people to the site and we converted Y out of that number, test that versus another version of that landing page. Again, it's fairly simple then to figure out what worked better,
Right.
and what didn't, and then take the element that worked better and now test something else and see what else you can optimize.
Test and test. Yeah, I know. Because you would think that you would understand, why people were relating to one image differently. Just say one's got a man in it, one's got a woman in it, where it seems fairly evident. But just to test and test is important, I assume, because it may be something else they're seeing. Maybe maybe the way the woman's dressed, or maybe the expression on her face, or some context of an image, or the advertisement that's not so evident to you may be the reason. So to test and test would make sense to me.
Well, it also helps identify areas where you have issues, right? And especially when you get onto the technical side and web design and testing mobile device conversion rates versus desktop conversion rates. Are you not doing something well on mobile that you're doing just fine on desktop because somebody's not really designing that interface for a mobile device,
Right.
or for the way that people use their mobile devices, or vice versa? Are you only worried about mobile, but you're generating a lot of traffic on desktop, and you're not really looking at it and paying attention to the way that you try to convert on desktop?
A lot of variables.
Yeah, and that's where I think a lot of people get overwhelmed, and they start to just kind of say, well, it's a lot easier not to do it than to figure out a way to do it right. Or not to not advertise, but not to measure and test their advertising, and just kind of say, well, it's just going to kind of be what it's going to be. But ultimately,
I could see how it could be interesting too, though. I mean, it's almost like a social experiment in some respects if you run a negative and a positive message, and just to really measure with that service or product how it's responding.
I mean, it's hugely interesting and
Sure.
enlightening, right? When you actually realize, I mean, we're the perfect example. We had a version of our website that I thought was going to just kind of blow people away, that I just really, really liked the way that it came together, what we did with it, and really it was our homepage primarily that we were kind of working on. And the one kind of primary element that I thought was really going to do well, people just skipped right over. Like it was like nobody cared. And when I then was able to kind of put myself in the user's shoes and look at it objectively, it was what we've talked about before. It was kind of a vanity section of the site. It was something that it was pretty cool, and
Right.
From our standpoint, was a good representation of us and what we do, and which was kind of what I thought where I thought the value was. But ultimately, it didn't solve anybody's problem.
Right.
It didn't get them where they wanted to go faster. It didn't answer their questions any faster. It didn't help them accomplish the goal they were trying to accomplish any sooner. It really was more about us kind of showcasing what we wanted to, and it wasn't about solving the user's problem.
Right.
And the only reason we knew that, because otherwise I would have gone on believing that, hey, it's great, it looks great, works great, it is what it is. But the only reason for that was heat maps. Right. I was tracking heat maps on our site of what people were actually clicking on, what they were looking at, what they were spending time with.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one that just was like a 0 across the board. It was basically like it just was non-existent on the page entirely. And so that happens a lot, where you do something you think people are going to respond to, and you think that, well, if nobody responds to this, it's because it was put in the wrong place, or, whatever other kind of criteria you want to blame it on, but not necessarily the fact that, look, it just didn't work because that didn't work. You got the right people there, but the design didn't work. It was the wrong whatever.
Right. I think about like the campaign we did recently, the direct mail campaign, where you came up with the idea of putting custom URLs on the postcards. And we're kind of in the middle of that campaign, but I mean, that's a very specific instance of how you can use it print for web, for data-driven design.
Mm-hmm.
I just, I get some custom pieces like that in the mail for my daughter. She's, she's looking at colleges. And I believe the other day she went on one of the links and it welcomed her by name on the site, which,
makes an impact.
Yeah, is really, an interesting application for something like that. Meanwhile, they're collecting data on her so that they can market to her again.
Oh, yeah.
But that's
they want to know she was there, and then
right.
she responded to the piece she got, and
right.
For sure. But there's, the practice of data collection, I think, maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I guess not if we're talking about data-driven design. But I think it's kind of funny sometimes that people get really, really protective of their data.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is, you're one of tens, if not hundreds of millions of anonymous users, pieces of data in that system. If Facebook, I think a lot of what they do is pretty shady, a lot of what they track, but ultimately there's not a person that's sitting there going, ooh, Chris Searles, was at this place, or, goes to this deli all the time, or, what was he doing here, or, any, viewed this page or whatever. Nobody cares. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. They don't, it's just kind of,
unless you're searching for ingredients to make a bomb. That's
the
only time.
And even then, right? I mean, Facebook apparently isn't very good at tracking down.
Yeah.
I guess they're getting better at,
so how close are they looking?
Misinformation and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's kind of what we're talking about here. The amount of data is so massive that the idea is to analyze it at scale and look for patterns. It's not to look at any one individual person's usage and that kind of stuff. And they'll try to match a person based on what an advertiser is saying they want to reach, and saying, okay, well, this person has been to that place or something like that.
Yeah.
But
you're a category, you're not an individual.
Yeah, right. Pretty much. But, I think ultimately the point of this entire episode really is the tools are there, right? Don't guess. When you don't have to guess, don't guess. Your first attempt is going to have to be somewhat of a targeted, educated guess. From there, optimize, measure, optimize, measure, optimize. It's the same thing. It was the closing of last week's episode, right? Test, optimize, test again, optimize, test again, optimize.
Work involved.
Yeah. Use the data. Don't get overwhelmed. Start somewhere, right? Just start.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you had to do everything all at once. Start with one thing. If you're optimizing one thing, you're doing better than you were doing yesterday. Start there and then try something else. Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. If you like this, click on the links for more from the Messengers. Don't forget to visit us online on our website at messengers.blog and click the subscribe button below and hit the little bell icon for notifications when new videos post. Thanks.